I like Vanderbilt's quarterback, but what about the rest of the roster? Let's talk about Missouri's next opponent right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, I want to talk about the Tennessee Volunteers slipping ahead of Missouri in the poll. Is that deserved? Let's get into that whole debate. And also, unfortunately, a rather gruesome injury for stud quarterback recruit Matt Zollers of Pennsylvania, Missouri's 2025 quarterback recruit. So I'm going to break that bad news coming up here in just a little bit. Before I start the program, though, I do want to tell you that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And the Vanderbilt Commodores got off to a rough start against Georgia State this past week and ultimately fell as a 10-point favorite at Georgia State. By the way, Missouri running back Marcus Carroll, that's his old squad for the previous 4 seasons. But that was a real big missed opportunity, I would say, for Vanderbilt, a team that knocked off Virginia Tech in week 1, blew the doors, no pun intended there, off of its week 2 FCS opponent as well. But man, to go down to Georgia State and not capitalize on the momentum there, oh man, hard to believe that Vanderbilt is going to be making a bowl game after that one. But I will say, Diego Pavia, quarterback for Vanderbilt, I was duly impressed by that young man. 6 feet tall, not the tallest guy in the world, but at 200 pounds, he's pretty well built. In fact, he's built more like a running back, I would say, and that's appropriate considering that Pavia had no quarterback offers from FBS out of high school, and he played his 2021 college football as a running back at New Mexico Military Academy. Not big on sliding, by the way, is Diego Pavia when he scrambles outside of the pocket, and that running back experience probably helps explain why. Now, his previous 2 seasons were as a quarterback at New Mexico State, the Albuquerque native, hanging around his home stomping grounds for the most part until transferring to Vanderbilt this past offseason. By the way, Pavia rushed for nearly 1,000 yards last season, and frankly, if you give him some time in the pocket, he's capable of making you play with his right arm as well. I like him as a player. I really do. But the problem is, when you go back and you watch, at least when I watched Vanderbilt against Georgia State this past week, well, I just had to wonder, where is the talent around this young man? Where are the receivers, the running backs, the tight ends that are going to help him out? And frankly, defensively, I didn't see a whole lot there either. I'll get to that here in just a minute. And there was one play early in this ball game where his lack of awareness in the pocket led to a fumble sack on 3rd down in the first series of the game for Vanderbilt, by the way. So an inauspicious start for the Commodores. The left tackle was obviously beat on this play, but Pavia, comes back into the pressure essentially. Just a real lack of awareness there. Now, fortunately, Georgia State only settled for a field goal. To be honest with you, there was a lot of different moments where Vanderbilt was fortunate that it didn't give up more points on its sloppiness and its mistakes. At one point, Vanderbilt caught a ball that on a kickoff return that snuck out across the goal line. The guy takes a knee with the ball on the goal line. So that ended up being a safety for Georgia State, although Georgia State only ends up scoring 3 points on the play. So Vanderbilt, the thing is, back to their offense, they do have a very large offensive line that average weight about 317 pounds. So they look good coming off the bus. They want to run the football. No question about that. But just 52 yards rushing through 3 quarters for Vanderbilt in this ball game. They just weren't making a lot happen at the point of attack. Now, as far as how this offense is actually going to look, you're going to see a lot of pistol sets, a lot of shotgun runs as well, a lot of motion and jet sweep action. If that sounds familiar, it should. Structurally, it's going to look quite a bit similar to Missouri's offense in that sense, but the Tigers do a lot more of the efficient dink, short type passing, for lack of a better phrase. Also, the Missouri's just much more efficient at running the football, number one. So, to me, while number one, you get a kid like Diego Pavia, who's a talented quarterback, a guy who can escape the pocket without a doubt, a guy who can run a little bit, a guy who's not afraid to run into contact either. Well, maybe that's not the type of player who's going to last an entire season injury-wise, but for one game, it's the type of high-variance player that could be an upset waiting to happen. The problem is, once again, I just don't see the talent around Diego Pavia being anywhere up to the standards of what Missouri is going to have around Brady Cook. And that's before we even get to the Vanderbilt defense, which doesn't exactly look like a big worry at this point either. I'm guessing, based on what I saw in this football game, that Vanderbilt will try a bend but don't break type of defense, because I just don't think their secondary can challenge the Missouri receivers consistently and expect to win. But a bend but don't break strategy hasn't seemed to be very effective against Missouri through 3 weeks either. So it just seems like it's going to be tough sledding for Vanderbilt. On defense, they show a ton of 2 safety looks, but don't be fooled, because often one of those 2 safeties will come into the box on a blitz or some type of intermediate zone, a robber coverage, something like that. But despite all of that, there's just not a lot of real confusion or big plays or havoc being created by Vanderbilt that I could see. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, like in my preview of the Buffalo game, I basically said, hey, Missouri has no chance to lose this football game. Well, I'm not going to go quite that far against Vanderbilt, but I have to say, after watching the Commodores this past weekend, they look a lot more like Buffalo with a better quarterback to me. So take that for what it's worth. And moreover, while Diego Pavia, the Vanderbilt quarterback, clearly a really good runner and an athlete, I sometimes, when I watch that game, I would have liked to have seen him stay in the pocket a little bit more. Now, he's definitely dangerous outside of the pocket for sure, but in the pocket, he's a pretty good passer too. And I thought at times, as you know, a lot of college quarterbacks who are especially good with their legs, they will abandon a clean pocket on occasion. So because of all this, I think it's going to be interesting to see if Missouri employs a similar strategy to what they did this past Saturday against Thomas Castellanos and Boston College. Will they sort of try to keep the rushers in their lanes, not try to go after the quarterback as hard, or will they be content to let Diego Pavia leave the pocket? Because at times, again, I would have liked to, just as a quarterback observer, if I'm observing him, evaluating him, I would have liked to see him hang in there a few more times. But if I had to guess, I'm guessing we probably will see a similar strategy that Missouri did last week. So some of those coverage busts, I doubt you'll be seeing them in week 4. Basically, we'll be running back the same strategy from last week. If I had to guess, that should be an advantage for Missouri this week too. And coming up on the program, let's talk about whether Tennessee deserved to leapfrog Missouri in the AP poll or not, plus some of the inherent bias that Missouri does indeed face nationally. Let's talk about all that here in just a little bit. But first, hey, Mizzou fans, have you heard about ROY? It stands for Return on You, and it's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. As all of you know, NIL has changed the game for athletes. Well, Roy changes the NIL game for fans. And fans' contributions are securely held and only distributed if the athlete makes the decision that aligns with the fan support. If not, the money is returned to the fan. By using Roy, fans not only support athletes financially, but also become part of their name, image, and likeness journey, helping them succeed both on and off the field. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get the Roy app for iOS or Android and start making an impact on your favorite team. Use referral code LOCKEDON for an opportunity to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for more details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with Roy. So this past Sunday, when I premiered my Boston College episode, my post-Boston College episode live on YouTube, I was chatting with the fans, as I often do when I premiere those episodes, and I mentioned the possibility that, hey, you know, Missouri, despite beating number 24 BC, I could see a scenario where Tennessee moves ahead of Missouri. Well, one Missouri fan attempted to kill me, the messenger, by saying, "What are you talking about? How can Tennessee possibly blah, 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 blah?" Again, all I was saying is I could see a scenario where this happens. And indeed, that's exactly what happened. Missouri and Tennessee basically just transposed. Missouri, who was 6th, went to 7th. Tennessee, who was 7th, moved to 6th. And obviously, if you're a Missouri fan, I get it. You're going, wait a second, how is this fair? We played the better opponent and won. Why are we being punished? It's a great question. And especially if you're a Missouri fan, you remember Josh Heupel, right? Hey, we've seen Josh Heupel run up the score on pathetically outmatched teams before. So why does this prove? What exactly does this prove? I truly understand all of those perspectives and arguments. I really do. At the same time, if I'm going to be objective, I can say, man, Tennessee's been really impressive so far. Not only is their quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, did I get that right? Nico is looking really impressive. He looks like the real deal. And by the way, that Tennessee defensive line looks quite beastly as well. So if you want to say you think Tennessee has been slightly more impressive than Missouri so far, who through the first 2 weeks of the season, hard to imagine how the Tigers could have looked much better other than completing a couple more deep shots or two that were just a few inches off. Other than that, you shut out your first two opponents. You beat Boston College, you know, and here's the thing. I think a lot of national people, I of course listened to some of the national takes, and while I haven't heard any disrespect of Missouri whatsoever, I do think there's an inherent national bias against Missouri right now. And it's not because anybody hates Missouri per se, although an individual could certainly have their own personal biases against Missouri. But just collectively, if you think about it, if you're a national college football pundit, well, you probably spent a lot of your Saturday watching Georgia and Kentucky, for example. You probably watched Alabama and Wisconsin too, and various other national games that, you know, for as much as Missouri is a top 10 team right now, to be brutally honest, they aren't a top 10 fan base just in terms of drawing eyeballs. That's just a reality. Hey, guys, I have a Missouri podcast. And I'm on a network with a lot of other teams in the SEC and across the country as well. I have some insight on this. That's just a fact of the matter. And because of that fact of the matter, the reality is, as a national pundit, Missouri is not going to be the first game that you're going to get to. That's just simply the case, and it's going to continue to be the case in 2024 until, in my opinion, until Missouri beats Alabama. If that happens, if the Tigers can go down to Tuscaloosa and beat the Crimson Tide, well, then all of a sudden, everyone in the country is going to take Missouri seriously. I promise you that's going to happen. But until then, beating Boston College, beating Vanderbilt, heck, even beating Texas A&M on the road, that's just not going to quite do it. Now, don't get me wrong, that A&M game will get maybe more eyeballs than anyone Missouri has played so far, but I'm just telling you, from the national perspective, the Tigers, there's a slight bias there, and it doesn't have anything to do with hate against Missouri. It's just a matter of Missouri in terms of the national pecking order just isn't as high as, well, hopefully we're going to be here in a few years. After Missouri makes the college football playoff this year, wins the national title, wins the SEC, does the ticker tape parade on downtown Columbia. I'm just painting a picture here, folks. But seriously, though, that's just the reality of the situation. Is it fair? Absolutely not. It's fair, but it's also human nature, and it's just the reality of every individual sort of limits on the amount of college football that you can actually take in. So while Missouri fans like myself don't think that the Boston College game was a dogfight per se, if you're just looking at the final score, you might think, wow, that was a dogfight until the very end. Boston College, the fact of the matter is it was a 6-point game. Do I think it was quite that close in terms of the actual talent on the field? And there were some fluky plays in there, all that stuff. Again, if you think that sounds all like excuse making, again, fine. You want to move Tennessee ahead of Missouri. I got to be honest. I don't have a lot of time to wring my hands about that because at the moment, it just doesn't really matter all that much. Missouri needs to continue to take care of business, and the only way an actual Tennessee against Missouri head-to-head comparison is going to really matter is if they both have the same record. Say both teams are 10-2 at the end of the season, and they're both arguing for a final playoff spot or two. Well, then it absolutely could matter, that national perception. But at the same time, we've got 75% of the season left, and the amount of perceptions that are going to change between now and then on Missouri and Tennessee and everybody else will be quite astonishing, I assure you. Just think about how we perceived Vanderbilt a week ago versus how we perceive them after taking a loss to Georgia State this past weekend, just for example. And some bad news on the high school football field for Missouri as Matt Zollers, a quarterback who was ranked as high as number 2 nationally in the class of 2025, been a strong Missouri commit for a few months now. Well, according to the Mercury, a local paper there in Pennsylvania, Matt Zollers was taken off the field in an ambulance following what was an apparent lower leg injury. And, well, his game was being streamed online. There were some Missouri fans watching that game, and, well, there were some screenshots circulating from that game of Matt Zoller's foot, quite honestly pointing in a direction that no human being's foot should point. So that was a horrifying image, number one. And the good news is, I guess, and we haven't gotten many details other than this was an apparent ankle dislocation, some type of tibia break, maybe all of the above. And the thing is, I've seen Missouri commit Sean Terry put out his support for Matt Zollers, among others. Zollers on his social media has been putting out a positive message out and everything like that. And here's what I'll say to Matt Zollers. Clearly, this was a fluke injury. His foot kind of got caught in the turf, that type of deal. This is probably the worst thing that's ever going to happen to him on a football field. So you know what? He got it out of the way. And the thing is, with this type of injury, again, could it just be an ankle dislocation, which obviously would be a horribly painful injury, something I don't want to ever have to experience. But my point is, not all of these types of injuries, as horrible as they look, he's certainly out for the rest of this football season. But my point is, hopefully, there's a decent chance here that this whatever this leg injury is will heal up, and physically, long term, especially by the time he's expected to play any for Missouri, I don't really have any major concerns right at this moment. Now, again, all these injuries are not created equally. Could there have been, further complications and with nerves and different types of things. Sure, that's possible. I've heard nothing about it. But my point is mostly just to put out a bunch of positivity and positive thoughts for Matt Zollers. Again, this is probably the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you injury-wise, kid. So you got it out of the way. That's the positive way I would be looking at it. But regardless, hopefully this is not a long-term serious thing. If anything, I'd be almost more worried about his mental state as a player in the future. That's the type of injury that can probably stick with you in the back of your mind for a while. That's always a challenge for any type of player who suffers a serious injury, is coming back to the football field and sort of just getting used to it again, getting that out of your mind and getting back to just playing football. So hopefully Matt Zollers can do that sooner rather than later. And coming up, believe it or not, does Missouri actually have a better chance to make the playoff than the Georgia Bulldogs? Plus, one member of the Mizzou ROTC may have saved Luther Burden's life. Or, well, probably more realistically, at least his hearing. So let's talk about that coming up here in just a second. But first, you've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, I have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. By the way, the Tigers hanging strong there, minus 21.5 against Vanderbilt. But no matter what you're into, you just got to visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. So obviously, Missouri, hey, I said a win is a win after the Missouri-Boston College game. Well, that particular phrase may have been even more appropriate for the Georgia Bulldogs, who eked out a 13-12 victory over Kentucky, a Kentucky and Mark Stoops squad that seemed to think, hey, we'll just beat Georgia with field goals. Won't that be awesome? Didn't quite work, though I do appreciate how hard the Wildcats played after an absolute beatdown against the Gamecocks the previous week. Well, I gotta say, after watching this, I think there's a good chance Missouri, believe it or not, may have a better chance than Georgia to make the college football playoff. First of all, for all the talk of Missouri's schedule, there's no doubt that the Tigers have an easier path to, say, 11 or 12 wins, for example, than Georgia does. We all know what Missouri's schedule is. Well, Georgia's path to the playoff is absolutely brutal. The Bulldogs have Tennessee, who looks much better than I think most would have anticipated so far, Texas, Alabama, and Ole Miss. All four of those teams, to me, are not only legitimate playoff contenders, you can make a pretty strong argument those are 4 national championship contenders as well. And not only that, not only do they have a tough road, does Georgia, a tougher path than they usually have through the SEC East, but I had some real concerns about Georgia's pass blocking this past week too. And as I said all offseason, when Brady Cook and Carson Beck are under pressure, I really don't think there's as huge of a difference between those two as the fact that Beck is a #1 overall draft pick at this point, according to some. Still a long way to go before we get there. But again, that just tells you that people think there's a pretty massive talent gap between Cook and Carson Beck. Well, I'm just telling you, if Georgia has trouble keeping Beck upright and keeping him from experiencing too much pressure, I'm just telling you, Georgia is going to be losing more ball games than you expect this fall. And one final fun note I thought to go out on here. This is from Shane Matson, one of my longtime listeners here, and also a guy I know from the Graves Golf program. He says, well, there is quite a bit to break down in this game, but to me, the play of the day, no question, came from one of our Mizzou ROT officers in the south end zone. When Luther Burden decided to take his first touchdown celebration from the student section to the hill One of our ROTC members deftly grabbed Luther and redirected him away from the cannon, which was about to fire. As any longtime Mizzou fan will know, having that cannon go off right next to one of the greatest wide receivers in the history of our school would have fit in just perfectly with the travails that have gone on in the north end zone in its troubled history. Kudos to the Mizzou ROTC crew and what I consider the day's biggest play. Well, yes, at the very least here, thank goodness we saved Luther Burden's hearing at the very least. Now, as for the rest of us in the crowd, well, our hearing was not spared by the Missouri sound mixing department. Can we please do something about that before the Vanderbilt game this week? That was not only annoying and irritating to listen to in the stands, all of the it's not only just the volume, but the feedback and all of the distortion that was created as well. It was not only irritating to listen to, it was honestly embarrassing. We're going to spend $250 million on a new north end zone complex, and we can't figure out how to get good sound in the stadium. This is something that was supposed to have been upgraded this past offseason. We better figure it out in week 4, folks. That's just another rant. I'm going to go in on the sound once again. But hey, thanks for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou. Once again, appreciate you making this show your first listen every day as per usual. And if you love this format, you got to check out Locked On College Football as well. Yes, another one of those anti-Mizzou bias people is Spencer McLaughlin. No, seriously, I like Spencer a lot. He'll get you ready for everything you need to know outside of Missouri in the national landscape. Find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts as well. So until next time, I am John Miller. Thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.